Welcome to the first Llama Lab session of 2019. It's been a while. It's been really nice weather outside. Today's looking pretty good as well, but I have some work to do on here and a few tests I need to perform. So today, what I'm up to is comparing multiple power meters and see how they line up indoors. This is a topic of debate quite often on online forums about people having multiple power meters and things not lining up and which one's correct and which one's not, and is the one with the higher figure always the correct one, which usually seems to be the case. Anyway, I thought I'd run you through what I do to test power meters and the steps and procedures that I go through to ensure that I'm removed from the picture and it's just the data that we're looking at. So here's the rundown of what I'm using today here in the Llama Lab. First up, it's about having multiple sources of power. If you have one power meter, you know that number, that's all you get, just watts. If you have two power meters, you're never quite sure which one is correct. If you've got three, now you're talking. And if you've got one of those that you know is good or consistent and has been tested against a number of other good known performers, then things can start lining up and you can find some answers. Trainer of choice at the moment for me for my Llama Lab tests for power testing is the Tax Neo. Today, I'm using the Tax Neo 2, which has proven just as good as the Tax Neo 1. The kicker itself, when spun down, that's also pretty good. The Drivo, Drivo 2, and the Diretto have all been pretty good, but the Neo seems to be floating around here in the Llama Lab, doesn't require any spin down, plugs in, and away it goes. So today, Tax Neo for the source of power from the Smart Trainer. Pedal-wise, there's a few pedals that I trust out there on the market. PowerTap P1s have always given me very good data. PowerTap P2s, which are effectively the same as the P1s, also good data. The Vector 3 pedals that I received as replacement to my original set, so the newer version of the Vector 3s, have been fine. Today on the pedals, I'm using the Favero Asioma Duos. I'm a big fan of these. They just seem to work. They really do. There's not much to them. Plug them on the bike, bed them in with a few sprints, and away you go. They're pretty good numbers and always shown to be pretty good up against the Neo and other good known smart trainers and power meters. So they're my two sources of power that I know are pretty good and that I can rely on. The third source, down here. It comes on the bike, the Giant Power Pro power meter, which looks like a Pioneer, but it's Giant's own power meter. I've collected over 1,500 kilometers of data outside using the pedals up against the Power Pro. Now it's time to come inside and see how it performs with my Llama Lab test. So they're the three sources of power that I'm using today from the hardware side of things. Data collection wise, I'm using the three Garmin Edge units that I have. The 1030, the 820, and the 520. I like to stick to the same manufacturer if I can. So given I've got three Edge units and only two elements, I'm using the Edge units today. I'm setting them to 1 second record interval, no auto pause, and I've taken them outside already and done a GPS sync for time. So they should be all on exactly the same time set as I hit go. Now it's not critical that they need to be on the same time, but you at least need to be on the same day. So when you compare the fit files together, they all line up correctly. The DCR analysis tool, you can line things up with an offset, so that's okay. You may see that later on when I compare all these and line them all up. I'll show you that later on in the video. But that's what I've done for those. They will be on the front of the bike here. That's what I'm using for the power meters, the data collection. How I'm collecting the data? Well, I try and remove myself from the picture. So I've got a Llama Lab test that I just ride, and I'll pull that up on the screen now. I have a 10-minute warm-up built into this workout with 1 minute rest where I stop and zero offset all power meters. And then from there, it's into 10-minute steady state at 200 watts, 10-minute steady state at 250 watts. Now during this steady state, I keep a very straight chain line on the bike and don't change gears whatsoever, so the chain line loss shouldn't be too much. I also keep a very clean chain and cassette to minimize any drivetrain losses. Then it's into a sprint, and then it's into some over and unders at 150 to 350 to 450 watts for 20 seconds. That's more of a test of the Smart Trainer and how they respond to erg mode, but it's also a good test for power meters and how they respond and report power. So that's the Llama Lab test that I do there on Zwift. It's just an erg mode workout, which can be pretty much done with any erg software, but I find the programming of the Zwift workouts pretty easy, and it breaks out into sim mode after those steady state things, so I can do the sprint. So super cool stuff there, and that's what I use to run through my data collection process. Now, other things in this room that I use the Tax Ant Plus stick down here connected to the PC. I try and ensure this room has no 2.4 gig Wi-Fi network enabled at all. All the devices that I use are on the 5 gig network to keep things nice and clean. And during the process, I try and keep my hands on the bars, concentrated, smooth left-right pedaling and just getting the workout done as smoothly as possible and as accurate as I can be for that erg mode. Now the numbers wise, I look at them, but they really don't do much. Well, it's erg mode. You can't really change the numbers, but I try not to influence the result by seeing what's happening on the screen. If one's low and one's high, I just get the job done and we look at the data afterwards. All data collection that I do for these Lama lab tests is over ANT+, so compatible with all head units, and I do make sure that every device here is on the latest firmware, assuming there's no bugs or any major issues reported with the latest firmware. So at the moment, the Vero Aciomas have been firmware updated, happy days. The Tax Neo, latest firmware, and the Giant Power Pro, which is on 2.3.5, installed just the other day. So there we are. I think that covers about everything that I do. There's a lot more to it than just jumping on and riding or jumping on and thinking you're doing 300 watts when you're really not. It's more about collecting the data cleanly and then reviewing what's happening later on. Now, there are losses in the drivetrain, which I do take into account. There are losses, for example, from the pedals to the crank. There might be maybe a watt or two. There shouldn't really be that much in it. But if we're seeing 20 watts difference between the pedals and what's happening at the back of the bike there, or what's being reported, there's a problem there. And also, because these are both left-right independent on the crank itself and the pedals, so I have a right side power meter times 2, left side power meter times 2, if I'm pushing down on the pedal and it's reading 150 watts, but on this crank side, on the exact same side with the same push down, is reading 180 watts or 190 watts, there's something very wrong there. And that's what I look into with the data from the left and right analysis as well. Anyway, I think we're well down the rabbit hole. That's the complete setup. Equipment that I'm using today. This may change in the future if we get better and better devices as new versions of things come out, but that's it. Enough of me talking. I've got to get this work done. It's about a 45-minute session. Let's roll. The pairing configuration that I use within Zwift is the ANT+ FEC power source from the Tax Neo 2, and that auto-populates the controllable trainer and the cadence sensor. I'm using the Ticker heart rate strap and pairing that across all head units and Zwift as well as a consistent source of heart rate, so I can line everything up later on if needed. Okay, clipping in and away we roll. After 10 minutes, off the bike, back pedal a few times, placing the crank and pedals in the correct position for the calibration / zero offset. Zero offsetting the crankset first, then over to the pedals themselves. Obviously the Tax Neo doesn't need a calibration or a spin down, so that stays as is. Once they're all set to zero, happy days, good to go. Back to the main screens, and time to ride. $200 watt session out of the way, onto the 250. You can see the power jump up pretty quickly. Okay, once the 250 is up, it's kicking into the sprint. It's always difficult to know which gear to pick in the virtual world to get maximum watts there, but a few seconds above 1,000 watts is good enough for what we need to look at. Now into the overs and unders, I'll quickly skip through those. And after 45 minutes, we are done. Okay, session done and data collected. Happy days. That all looked pretty good. The data collection was pretty clean. No dropouts. There was a bit of weirdness happening at the last 450 interval there in erg mode where it didn't let go of the resistance and it dropped to 0 watts. So a little bit of wonkiness there, but we should get some clean data from the previous ones and up until that point. In the sprint after my steady states, I kind of missed the gearing and had to back off and go again, but I'd still got a good 1100 or so watts for a few seconds there to check how these things went. Okay, they're all just saving up to Garmin Connect now. But overall, a pretty good session, no major dropouts through the steady state section, so the environment here was nice and clean. And today was the first ride of the Giant bike on the Tax Neo with the through axle adapter. All seemed to go pretty well. Okay, I'm gonna get my cool down done. We'll get all this data uploaded to Garmin Connect for the fit files. We'll pull them down to the DCR microanalysis tool, and I show you how I'll line everything up. And we'll have a look at that power. With all the head units now synced up to Garmin Connect, I can download the original fit files it creates and sync them over to DC Rainmaker's analysis tool. But first of all, downloading the fit files themselves is a bit of a process. You have to line up your ducks to make sure you've got the right head unit linked up with the right power meter with the right naming. The ANT IDs are inside the fit files, but it's just easier to name the files the correct thing. Okay, so the process being, we jump over to Garmin Connect here. So the Edge 520, we'll download that file, export original is the command I'm after there. Okay, so this one was the, we'll just save it as, it saves it as just a long serial number. So it's a little bit hard to manage exactly what things are, but we'll open that fit file up and we'll call that was the Tax Neo, and that was the Edge 520, recording that data there. Next one was the Edge 820, export original on that. Save that down. 53, we opened that one up, and that was recording the Asioma Duos. That was on the Edge 820. And the last one, which was the Edge 1030, recording the Power Pro. Export original. 32 was the number of that one. 32, here we go. This one here. That one was the Power Pro. Edge 1030. Okay, cool. We have our 3 fit files. You can also download those over USB or maybe sync them to other services, but that's how I download all 3 fit files. Now it's over to DC Rainmaker's analysis tool, my favorite website on the internet. You can see there I've got quite a few things on screen from a few other tests. So we just click on new set there. We pull those 3 files in. Drag and drop's the easiest way. We hit create, and that does our overlay automagically. Now this isn't a true deep dive analysis of the data of the giant Powermeter Power Pro. I will be diving into that in a future video. It just happens to be the data is caught in the crossfire of this video about how I can compare power meters together. So what we have here, all is looking pretty good. I can see a small dropout here, so that's the Tax Neo dropping to 0 for a little bit there. Anyhow, let's dive into the full details of what we're seeing on screen here. So that's what it gives you first of all. As soon as you drag those in, and as I time synced all 3 head units outside, they're usually pretty good. If you're starting a GPS or a head unit for the first time in a few weeks or a few months, it may be 30 seconds drifted or maybe even a few days drifted. So we can usually tell that by using, as I scroll down here, the heart rate data. Now I use the 1 heart rate strap and I've paired that to all 3 head units plus Zwift. And you can see here the heart rate data isn't quite lined up. These should all be perfectly in line because I've only got the 1 heart and it's all coming from the same source. So you can see there's a bit of shadowing. What I usually do is line those up. So you can see they're all about 1 second off from each other. So the red one is 1 second laggy. The blue one is 1 second too fast. Let me have a look at lining these up. So this is the process I go through to make sure things are lined up within the 1 second. There's always going to be 1 or 2 seconds depending on when you hit start, depending on when the recording interval kicks in with those head units. So to get things lined up, it does take a little bit of manipulation of the data. We can also dive into the sprint here and just see a bit of shadowing of when things are reporting. That could be the power meter itself, likely the recording interval. So you can see here the Asioma Duos need to be pulled back 1. It's a little bit too high, so you see the spike there, and that might do us, I think. The Giant might need to be pulled back 1 as well, or the, what have we got, the purple one fixed. Sorry, it takes a little bit to really dive my head around into this one. So we said the Favero Asiomas, and we can do an offset. So the Asiomas we said was, so you can hit edit on that, and there's a time offset. So we put a -1 there. It's going to pull that data back 1 second. Should line things up a little bit better there. I think the Tax Neo is a second too quick. Scrolling back to the heart rate to make sure everything's lined up there, and it does appear that the purple one is off. The Tax Neo needs to be +1 or +2. So we go down to the Tax Neo, put an extra second time offset on this. So it does take a little bit of getting used to lining up all the data correctly within the 1 second. Once you apply smoothing, it's not too bad. So you can see the heart rate there looks a lot better now than it did when we first loaded it up. And those sprints and everything there looks pretty good. Okay, sprint there is looking pretty good, and the overs and unders. Okay, so there's the process there. It's a little bit detailed of how to line all the 3 files up. 2 is a lot easier, 3 is not too bad, 4 gets a bit tricky. The raw data here is unsmoothed, so it is 0 second smoothing. It's pretty much what comes straight out of the power meters and are recorded by the head units, all in the same way using the Garmin Edge units. So it's looking a little jagged, but that's just power. That's how it's recorded. So you can see that it's all over the shop. If you want to make that look nice and pretty, you can go down here to the smoothing interval down at the below, give it a rolling 5-second smoothing, hit save on that. And when we scroll all the way back up, things look a lot better. As you can see here, it looks much better. But what I want to do is look into the data itself, the raw data. So I'm going to go back to 0 smoothing for now, just initially, to have a look at the data. Okay, we're back to 0 and analyzing the data. Not particularly this data. Again, the giant power meter just happens to be caught in the crossfire, but you will get an insight of what's going on. What I usually do is the first 10 minutes, which is the warm-up prior to the 0 offset that I perform at 10 minutes, that's usually thrown away here. We can have a look at this data nice and close. So the numbers we have here is 203, 198, so the Aciomas and the Neo are pretty close, and the Giant Power Pro is a little higher there. Doesn't really mean much because it could be the first bedding in process. Again, things getting warmed up, usually throw that data away. It's into the data following that is where things really start to show themselves. So you can see there the 200 watt steady state into the 250 watt steady state into those sprints. I usually grab to about there so we can see the data itself with a decent scale. So we can see a dropout there from the Tax Neo. Interesting stuff, and no dropouts from anything else. Overall though, the data there, I then look at the overall numbers down the bottom there. So 225, 222 from the Aciomas and the Tax Neos, pretty close, and 232 from the Giant Power Pro. It was reading a little high, as I could see on the head unit there, but that's my conclusion from that just now. Into the sprints, all looking pretty good. Peak power we can see down below in the summary table, but just looking at the data here, unsmooth, 1132, 1134, 1156. So the Aciomas and the Neo, really, really close, good to see. And the Power Pro, 1156, 20 watts higher, which is a constant theme I'm seeing throughout here. Again, not a review of the Power Pro, but it kind of is, if you get the picture. Into the overs and unders, or just riding along first, into the overs and unders. You can see here the Power Pro just ticks along, just riding along a little higher. Overs and unders, a little spiky as I get used to erg mode again for the first time in a few weeks, and the trainer settles in. So erg mode itself kicks in resistance, backs off the power, so attack, decay, sustain, release. It's a musical thing that happens with erg mode as well. So you can see here, kicks in the watts, it overshoots, it brings it back, stabilizes, and then disappears. And then to the 450 there and 400. So they look pretty good there, but it's unsmoothed data over 20 seconds. Actually, I can scroll in there. Numbers wise, 236, 231, Acioma Duos and Tax Neos, 247 for the Power Pro, which is reading a little high there. And then into some just riding along, and I gave it a bit of a spurt up the hill on Watopia. You can see here the Power Pro is reading a little higher than the other two, but 179, 175, 191 for the Power Pro. So that's the way I analyze that data. Those are the numbers. I will be submitting those over to Giant to have a look at that data. For me, I'm not confident in using the Power Pro as a source of power. I'll talk about why accurate power is important in a minute, but looking at those numbers, I'm not confident enough to both leave that power meter on the bike or use that as power comparison for anything else, knowing that there is an offset of 15 to 20 watts from the pedals and also the Tax Neo. Breaking it down to left and right power, this is a little interesting. So we might be able to determine why the power meter on the Giant is reading a little higher. You can see there is a bit of a difference with left and right from the Aciomas and the Power Pro versus the Tax Neo, which does read left and right, kind of. It's in their own software that it reads left and right. Not quite compatible with the head units yet. So you can see there, the tax Neo reports left and right, but it only puts all the power onto the right pedal channel. So hopefully we see an update from tax soon on that. That aside, we can dive in a little closer and have a look at what's going on pedal-wise. And yeah, this does get really down the rabbit hole of what's happening here. But we can see there's a trend there of that red line being higher than everything else on the second set. So diving into what the red line is, and it's kind of hard to see up there, but we can tell there the giant right side, or the giant left side's reading 108, the right side's reading 192, and the left on the Vero's 103 and 99. So not much we can determine from that, but you can see the trend there of that red line being higher than everything. Digging further into this, okay, this is probably a better point to look at from here. The Vero left and right reading 128, 128. Oh, good score there, 50-50, balance on the pedals. But the Giant Power Pro is reading 139, 123 for the exact same point in time. So one is correct and one isn't. Given this left power meter, right power meter, right power meter, and these two are disagreeing, and these two are disagreeing. Anyhow, data for the engineers to review. Something to look into there. Scrolling down, there's also the mean max power graph provided on the DCR analysis tool here, which is pretty good, but can be skewed by an overall ride or the initial 10 minutes if it's really wonky data for the first 10 minutes. But we do get a good overall picture here of what was happening, and if you've picked up on what I think is happening at the moment, it's occurring right here. So the Vero aciomas for the first minute, or the peak 1 minute power for the ride, 404 on the aciomas versus 404 on the tax Neos. That's pretty damn good. I like being told that if the trainer's doing that many watts and I'm doing that many watts and the pedals are doing that many watts, it's happy days. There will be losses, yes, but if they can line up that closely, I'm happy with that. The Power Pro, 418. So a few watts high for the 1 minute section. Over to the 5 minute section, 276, 275, 284 on the Giant Power Pro. And it's continuous through all the way there. So the Giant Power Pro is a little higher. Interesting stuff. Scrolling down to the stats table, again, it's just a quick visual. You can see there the average power. So I'm assuming, without even looking at the data, I'm going to have the aciomas probably reading the same as the Neo or very close, and the Giant Power Pro reading higher. Yeah, spot on. 180 versus 177 versus 187 for average. Weighted power, which is the normalized power, 234, 231, 242. Max power is pretty good, except that Giant is reading a little higher again. There's a consistent theme. So that's it. That's the process that I run through, and a bit of a deep dive, even though I said I wasn't going to deep dive too much, into the data of the Giant Power Pro. So for recording data outside, it's very much the same process as this, just not structured. In the real world, there's no erg mode, but we do have hills and steady state efforts outside if we can hold the same power or in the same cadence, or just try and ride smooth enough in different power zones and sprints, obviously. Yeah, lining those up is pretty easy. Same as this, analysis, same as this, and it's pretty much one for one there. And as I said, I have 1,500 kilometers of data of the pedals and the Giant Power Pro, which I'll be submitting over to Giant for review on this one. So there we have it. That's the review process of the data. And yeah, apologies to Giant. I've sort of jumped the gun there. They're still to respond to me on this one. It may be a busted unit that I have. It's only one unit that I've tested against. But again, submitting this data over to them possibly could lead to better firmware updates, more calibration processes, or just getting that fixed. Not good enough in my eyes just yet. Okay, to wrap up today, just a few comments around power meters, power accuracy, and why it's important, because no doubt this is a topic of very, very long discussion. First up, I'll give you a brief overview of why I think power accuracy is important. Well, a lot of the argument is around power accuracy isn't important, it's only reliability and consistency. Yeah, that's true, but only in isolation. And what I mean by isolation is if you're using only the one power meter, if you'll never upgrade power meters, and you're never using things like Zwift or any online gaming platforms to train and compare yourself against others, fine, that's no worries. My analogy is like building a house using a miscalibrated measuring tape. Let's say that measuring tape is 10% too big. If you measure absolutely everything according to spec with that one tape measure in isolation and build your house to the plans, you'll build a house. It'll work, the doors will close, everything will line up based on that one tape measure. in isolation. If you were to bring in anything else to that house and have a builder come around with his tape measure, or have other products brought in, again, not in isolation anymore, nothing will match up. And it's the same with power meters. If you're going to be changing power meters in the near future, or you have two bikes, or you're racing on Zwift, or you're racing somebody on an e-sport event, and you are 1-for-1 equal physically and physiologically, then it's not an even playing field if you have different reading power meters. Power is a known value. It can be measured. It needs to be measured. And if your power meter is not within a few percent of every other power meter out there, there's a problem that needs to be addressed. And again, on the esports side of things, this is especially critical that these devices read correctly, because there's national titles, there's national jerseys being awarded, and soon there'll be big money up for grabs. And for us to believe in the esport that will be indoor cycling, these things need to read correct and fair for the competition. The reason why I take it upon myself as a bit of a hobby to compare power meters and do this and dive down the rabbit holes, well, nobody's really testing these accuracy claims other than the companies producing these power meters themselves. They stamp on the side of the box, 2%, plus or minus 1.5%, less than 1% accurate, well, 99, you know what, it's kind of weird the terminology they use, but they're claiming themselves to be accurate. But are they? And are they within spec? It has been seen on this channel here and the work that I've done with the initial Vector 3s that I had that they weren't within spec. My right power meter was reading low based on a static weight test, proving that taking me out of the picture and my pedal stroke and everything, that power was wonky. It wasn't calibrated correctly. With the replacement Vector 3s, spot on. So even Garmin didn't get it right on the side of the box. And also my Watt Team Powerbeat G3 rabbit hole. If you remember those videos, that was a very, very long process of a few days of writing, a few more days of data analysis, and a few back and forwards and emails to the team there over at Watt Team, where I pinpointed an issue with the power meter where I could actually have it read high based on the pedal stroke, the point in the pedal stroke where I was applying the pressure to the pedal. Ended up being where the sensor was placed or the strain gauge was placed on the crank really probably wasn't the optimal spot. They knew this, they confirmed with me that what I was seeing was correct, and they enjoyed me going through the process and figuring out some of the shortfalls of their power meter. So this is why I do it. There's numbers stamped on the side of the box. Are we confident enough that those numbers are correct? And as a cyclist, as a competitive cyclist and a training cyclist, I want to know that the data that I have is accurate and is comparable for the next power meter that I have in the near future. And speaking of which, I'll throw in my power meter history here just as an overview of how many power meters I have ridden and tested in the past few years. So SRM wired, SRM wireless, PowerTap hubs, Quark S-Works Spider, which I love those units. Probably one of my favorite power meters, the Quark S-Works Spider. I've had 3 of those, and they can be statically weight calibrated. And once calibrated, they lined up with the Neo just fine. Love those things. PowerTap P1s, P2s, Watt Team G2 left, G3 dual, XKD single stages, Gen 1 left, Gen 3 left, Gen 3 dual, Vector 3s, Rotor twin power, ZWatt Z Spider, more on this one soon, and Pioneer dual, again, maybe more on this one soon again, and the Giant Power Pro, as well as every other smart trainer on the market. So my history and experience with power meters out there on the market is pretty extensive, and I definitely know if it's not reading correct. Okay, wrapping this one up for today. Thanks for sticking around and allowing me to show you how I test power meters, the equipment that I use, and why I think it is so very, very important that they get these power numbers right across the board, not only for your own data, but for that esports thing. It's going to be big. We need the data to be correct. There's a number of discussion points in this video that could go on for a while. Comment below if you have any discussion points or things you'd like to discuss. We might be able to pull in a few other resources here to keep this ball rolling and keep these products being better and better as they roll out off the shelf. All right, thanks for viewing. Again, hit subscribe if you like this one, and we'll see you soon.